Some places look honest from a distance.
She had $14. And she had already seen enough lies to know one on sight.
She looked at him the way she looked at a ledger page that didn't balance.
He came off that porch like a man who had never once been told no.
Norah Caulfield did not cry at her husband's funeral. She stood straight beside the grave while the pastor read the words he always read, while the neighbors stood with their hats in their hands and their eyes cast down, while the wind came off the Montana flatlands and moved through the cottonwoods at the edge of the cemetery with a sound like something breathing. She stood straight and she looked across the open ground to where a man in a dark coat stood 3 rows back with his head bowed and his hands folded in front of him. Bernard Hale, president of the First Territorial Bank of Billings. The man who had called in Daniel Caulfield's loan 6 months before the contract permitted it, citing a clause buried in the 3rd page of an agreement Daniel had signed in good faith and never fully understood. The man who had accepted Daniel's cattle as partial payment and sold them at auction before the ink on the seizure notice was dry. The man who had sent a letter of condolence to Norah 2 weeks after Daniel died, written in careful formal language that expressed sympathy without admitting anything at all. He stood with his head bowed like he was grieving alongside her. Norah looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way she looked at a ledger page that didn't balance, with the particular stillness of a woman who knew something was wrong and was working out exactly what it was and exactly what she intended to do about it. She did not look away until the pastor said amen and the people around her began to move. Then she turned back to the grave and she made herself a promise so quiet it never reached her lips. She was done being the kind of woman who waited for someone else to fix things. Daniel had been a good man, the best she had known. Patient and steady and honest in the particular way that Montana Territory did not reward, the kind of honest that assumed other people meant what they said and signed what they understood and kept the agreements they made. He had borrowed money to expand the cattle operation the same year drought hit the northern flatlands, and the market price for beef fell by 1/3. When the bank called in the debt early, there was nothing left to fight with. She had gone to the county clerk. She had written letters. She had sat in a lawyer's office in Billings for 3 hours while a man 12 years younger than her explained, slowly, as though she might not understand the words if he spoke at normal speed, that the terms of the loan were complicated, and that perhaps she might want to let someone more familiar with financial matters review the documentation. Daniel was already in the ground by then. She had not told the lawyer that. She had thanked him for his time and walked out into the August heat and never went back. The farm sold for less than 1/3 of what it was worth. She kept the ledger books, every account Daniel had ever kept, every payment, every entry in his careful even handwriting. She kept them because numbers did not lie. People lied. Banks lied. Lawyers explained things slowly so that you would not notice that they were not actually explaining anything. But numbers, when you read them honestly, told you exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it. She had found work as an account clerk in Billings for 2 years after the farm was gone. Then the office closed. Then she took in bookkeeping for 3 different merchants. One of them paid her. One of them shorted her twice and blamed her arithmetic. One of them simply stopped answering the door. She was 29 years old, which was not old, and she knew that. But Montana Territory had a way of wearing a person into something older than their years, and by the time she saw the notice posted outside the general store on a Tuesday morning in late July of 1884, she had $14 to her name and a suitcase that had belonged to her mother, and a quality of attention in her eyes that made most people slightly uncomfortable without knowing why. Hargrove Ranch, seeking experienced accountant, wages negotiable, room and board included. She took the job before she finished reading the notice. The wagon ride to Hargrove Ranch took most of a morning. The driver was a lean, sun-darkened man named Gant who did not offer his first name and did not talk, which suited Norah entirely. She sat in the wagon bed with her suitcase beside her and watched the land change as they moved away from Billings, the flat scrub opening up into rolling country with good grass, the kind of deep-rooted grass that meant water running somewhere below the surface. Her husband would have noticed that. Daniel always noticed grass first, before fences, before buildings, before anything else a man might use to measure a piece of land. She noticed the fences. They were well kept for a working ranch. The posts were set straight and the wire was tight, and where repairs had been made, they had been made properly, not patched but replaced. That told her something. Either the man who ran this place cared about doing things correctly, or he was afraid of what fell apart when things were left to slide. In her experience, those were 2 different kinds of operations, and they ran on very different principles. Gant pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and said, without climbing down, that he'd brought the accountant. A man came off the porch fast, the way men came off porches when they had been waiting, and wanted you to understand that their time was valuable. He was not particularly tall, but broad through the chest and dressed well for a working ranch, a silver watch chain catching the late morning light as he moved, his boots polished in a way that suggested a man who understood appearances and spent regular effort maintaining them. He had the kind of face that was handsome in a deliberate way, the face of a man who had always known people were looking at him and had learned early to use that fact. "Edmund Voss," he said. He extended his hand and his smile at the same moment. "Ranch manager. We spoke by letter." "We did," Norah said. She shook his hand once, the way you shook a business associate's hand, and climbed down from the wagon without waiting for assistance. She saw something move across his expression. It was brief, barely there, gone before it could be read clearly. But she had spent 2 years watching men react to the fact that she did not behave the way they expected her to behave, and she recognized the particular quality of that flicker. He was not used to women who did not wait. "I'll show you the office," he said. "The previous accountant left things in some disorder, I'm afraid. You'll have your work cut out for you getting the records organized. That's what you're paying me for," Norah said. The office was at the side of the main house, a separate room that smelled of old paper and dust and something sour she couldn't immediately place. The desk was buried under stacked ledger books and loose pages and invoices that had been sorted at some point and had since collapsed back into disorder. There were 3 different ledger books open to 3 different pages, and none of the 3 appeared to have any clear relationship to the others. Filing had been attempted. Whatever system had been used no longer held. She stood in the doorway for a moment and took a full inventory of what she was looking at. "How long since the last accountant left?" she asked. 8 months, Edmund said from behind her. She did not respond to that immediately. She was thinking about 8 months of unmanaged records on a working ranch of this size, about what that meant for payroll accuracy and supply reconciliation and vendor agreements. She was also thinking about the smell, not dust, something else, the particular staleness of a room that had been closed, more than it had been open. "I'll need at least a week before I can tell you what I'm actually looking at," she said. "Of course," Edmund said. He had come into the doorway behind her, not into the room. "Take whatever time you need. I only ask that any questions about ranch operations come to me first. The workers here are good men, but they're not business people. I wouldn't want you to get inaccurate information and find yourself going down the wrong path." Norah turned and looked at him. He was smiling again, wide and comfortable and completely at ease, the smile of a man who had said something he considered entirely reasonable and expected it to be received as such. "I'll come to you with my questions," she said. She did not say she would only come to him. He seemed to hear what he wanted to hear in that, and left her to begin. She worked through the afternoon without stopping for dinner. A man she had not yet met knocked twice on the doorframe at some point in the early evening, set a plate of food on the corner of the desk without speaking, and left. She ate without looking up. By the time the light through the single window had gone entirely, she had identified 4 separate accounting systems that had been running simultaneously with no apparent connection to each other. She had found 2 sets of payroll records that did not match. She had found a running tally of supply expenditures that, if accurate, would have outfitted 3 ranches of this size. She closed the last ledger book and sat quietly for a moment, with her hands folded on top of it. She had seen bad bookkeeping before. She had seen careless bookkeeping and lazy bookkeeping and the kind of bookkeeping that happened when someone died in the middle of a project and no one else could make sense of what they had left behind. She had seen records kept by people who didn't understand numbers and records kept by people who understood them fine but couldn't be bothered to maintain them properly. This was not any of those things. The disorder was too consistent. The gaps were too specific. The things that were missing in a pattern, and patterns meant intention. She picked up her pen and began making notes. She was back at the desk by 6 the following morning. She had been awake most of the night, not from worry but from the particular kind of focus that came over her when she found something that needed to be understood. A narrowing of attention that had driven Daniel to gentle exasperation on more than one occasion. "You go somewhere when you're working," he used to tell her. "Somewhere the rest of us can't follow." She had gone somewhere. She was still there. She did not go looking for the man who left the plate. He found her. She was walking the fence line, along the northern boundary of the property before breakfast, the way she always walked a property in the first days of a new job. Numbers made more sense when you understood what the numbers were supposed to represent. A supply expenditure meant something different when you could see the fences those supplies were meant to maintain. A payroll figure for a ranch hand meant something different when you understood what a ranch hand's actual working day looked like. She had learned that from Daniel, from years of watching him read a piece of land the way other people read a page. She came around a stand of cottonwoods and nearly walked directly into a man crouching over a fence post. He looked up without startling. He was around 40, perhaps a shade under, lean and deeply sun-darkened with a quality of watchfulness about him that came from years of working outdoors in open country where being still and being careful were the same thing. His hands were the hands of a man who worked with them, not the hands of a man who directed others. His shirt was plain canvas. His boots had been frizzled at least twice. His hat was pushed back on his head in the way of a man who had forgotten it was there. He had a measuring quality about his attention. Not unfriendly, not threatening, simply the look of a person who had learned to assess things carefully before deciding what they were. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Norah said. She stepped to the side to get a better look at the broken post. The wood had gone soft from the inside, rot working up from the ground invisible until it failed. "You'll need to dig that out at least 2 feet deeper than it looks," she said. He glanced at the post. "I was figuring 3, he said. 3 is better." She was looking at the ground around the base. "There's still moisture from the spring runoff. It'll come back for you if you don't get below it." He looked at her for a moment with something that was not calculation, and was not the polite attention men sometimes performed when they were actually thinking about something else. It was closer to genuine curiosity. "You're the new accountant," he said. "Norah Caulfield." He said his name was Reed. He didn't offer more than that. "How many posts on this line are you replacing?" she asked. "4 that I've found. Probably 2 more I haven't gotten to yet." She was thinking about the supply ledger. The one that showed lumber and fencing expenditures so far above what a working ranch of this size should require that she had flagged the page twice already. "Is all the fencing on the property maintained by the ranch directly?" she asked. "Or are there shared boundary lines with neighboring properties?" Reed set down his hammer. He looked at her with that same careful attention. "Most of it's ours," he said. "There's a shared line with the Alderman property on the eastern edge, about a 1/4 mile. Is there a written maintenance agreement for that section?" There was, 3 years back. "Is it current?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't believe it's been renewed." Norah wrote something in the small notebook she carried in her coat pocket. "I'll need to find it," she said. "Or find out why it isn't there." Reed watched her write. He said, "Edmund handles the agreements," and then he stopped himself slightly, in the manner of a man who had been about to say something else and had chosen not to. "Edmund handles the agreements," he repeated more evenly the second time. She noticed the hesitation. She filed it without commenting on it. "Yes," she said. "He does." She put the notebook away and walked on. She felt his eyes on her back for a moment, steady and unhurried, before she heard him pick up the hammer again. She came back past the same section of fence 2 hours later, on her way in for breakfast. He had dug the rotted post out clean and was setting the new one, packing the dirt in careful layers the way you did when you wanted the work to last past the first hard winter. He did not look up as she passed, but when she was a few steps beyond him, he spoke without pausing his work. "The maintenance agreement you're looking for," he said. "If you can't find it in the office files, try the 3rd drawer on the left side of the storage cabinet in the equipment shed. There's a box of older documents. Nobody's touched it in a while." Norah stopped walking. She turned. "Why would it be there?" she asked. "Because that's where older documents go," he said, "when someone doesn't want them found easily. He pressed a final layer of dirt down around the post base, but doesn't want to be accused of destroying them either." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look up. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once without speaking. She found the maintenance agreement in the equipment shed at 11 that morning, in exactly the location he had described. In the 3rd drawer on the left side of the storage cabinet, in a wooden box that had not been disturbed in some time based on the dust settled along the lid. She also found 11 other documents she had not been looking for. There was a deed transfer for a parcel of land on the ranch's western boundary, 40 acres, dated 2 years prior. The parcel had been sold for a price that was based on the surrounding land valuations in the county records she had reviewed that morning, significantly below market value. The signature on behalf of the ranch was not one she had seen on any document she had handled so far. The buyer was listed as the Meridian Land and Cattle Company, a name she did not recognize and could not find in any of the county records Edmund had provided her. She found a second deed transfer, 23 acres. Different date, same buyer, same below market price, same unfamiliar signature. She found a third, 16 acres along the Northern Creek line, same buyer. But this one was different from the others in one specific way that she read twice before she allowed herself to understand it. According to this document, the parcel had been sold 18 months ago, but when she had reviewed the county records that morning, this parcel was still listed as belonging to Hargrove Ranch. The sale had been recorded internally, but it had never been filed with the county. She read it a third time. She was not a woman who panicked. She was not a woman who made large decisions quickly. She was a woman who looked at what was in front of her, decided what it meant, and then decided what to do about it. She looked back at the first deed transfer, at the unfamiliar signature on behalf of the ranch. She looked at the date and compared it in her memory to the payroll records she had reviewed the previous afternoon. Then she understood something that made the room go very quiet around her. The name above the signature line was not Edmund's. It was not any name she had seen on a current Hargrove Ranch document. It belonged to a man the payroll records showed had left the ranch 8 months ago, the same 8 months since the previous accountant had, according to Edmund, moved on to better opportunities elsewhere. Except this signature was dated 6 weeks after that man would have been gone. She put everything back in the box in the precise order she had found it, closed the lid, and stood in the equipment shed for a full minute. She was holding a question she was not yet ready to ask out loud. Someone had signed a departed man's name to a land transfer document, which meant either the man had not yet departed when this was signed, or someone had signed it for him after he was gone. Both possibilities led to the same place, and neither of them was simple. She went back to the office, sat down at the desk, picked up her pen, and started mapping what she knew. It took her 4 days to build a complete picture. She worked in the evenings after supper when the main house was quiet and the light through the office window turned from gold to gray and then went out entirely, and she worked by lamplight. She went through every ledger book a second time, then a third, every invoice, every payroll record. She cross-referenced supply expenditures against the delivery receipts she found in the third cabinet drawer, comparing the quantities ordered against the informal logs the ranch hands kept in the bunkhouse, because ranch hands always kept their own tallies when their livelihood depended on the accuracy of the count. The pattern she found was patient and careful, and had been built by someone who understood that the first rule of long-term theft was never to take too much at once. No single transaction was large enough to draw immediate attention. The fraudulent invoices were written for services that could plausibly have occurred. The payroll discrepancies were small enough that any individual worker might have doubted his own memory before he doubted the record. There were months where nothing was taken at all, long, clean stretches that would have reassured any casual reviewer that the books were essentially honest. But compounded across 4 years, the numbers told a different story entirely. She did not write the total figure down anywhere outside her private notebook. She was not ready to put it anywhere that could be found. But she knew it, and she sat with it, and she understood that what she was looking at was not careless and was not opportunistic. It had been built deliberately by someone who had expected, from the beginning, that the books would eventually be reviewed. Someone had built a system designed to survive investigation. That was the part that kept her at the desk past midnight on the 4th night. Long after the lamp had burned low, and she had to angle the notebook toward the window to catch the moonlight. She was not afraid, exactly. She had been afraid before, and she knew its shape, the way it lived just behind the sternum and reminded you every few hours of what you were risking. What she was feeling now was more specific than fear. It was the focused attention of a woman who understood that she was standing at the edge of something much larger than a simple accounting irregularity, and who was deciding, carefully, exactly how to proceed. She closed the notebook. She opened it again. She kept working. Edmund came to the office on Friday morning, as he did most Fridays, to review the week's progress. He was dressed well, as always, the watch chain catching the light, his manner easy and practiced. He stood across the desk from her and asked the standard questions about reconciliation and vendor totals and outstanding supply orders. And she answered with the standard answers, the accurate surface-level answers, that described the visible work she had done without touching anything she had found beneath it. She watched him while she answered. She watched him the way she had watched Bernard Hale across the cemetery, with the cold, clear attention of a woman who knew exactly what she was looking at and was deciding what to do about it. "How are you finding the older records?" he asked. His voice was easy. "Complicated," she said, "but I'm making progress. If anything is unclear, just come to me. Some of the filing from a few years back is a bit inconsistent. The man before you wasn't particularly organized." She looked up from the ledger she was holding. "What happened to him?" she asked. "The previous accountant." Edmund paused. A fraction of a second, brief enough that if she had not been watching carefully, she might have missed it. "He moved on," he said pleasantly. "Better opportunities elsewhere." "It happens." "Of course," Norah said. He stayed another 10 minutes, asked 3 more questions, complimented her on the progress she had made getting the office organized, and left. She waited until she heard his footsteps cross the front porch and descend into the yard. Then she sat very still for a moment. Then she got up, crossed the yard to the equipment shed, and stood in front of the storage cabinet. She was thinking about the previous accountant. About how a man who packed to leave in an orderly way with enough notice to send ahead for work would leave documents in a drawer because he did not want them found easily but could not bring himself to destroy them. Or perhaps he had not packed at all. She thought about that for a long time. Then she thought about the man at the fence post, who had known exactly which drawer to send her to, who had told her plainly and without apparent concern about the implications of what he was saying that documents ended up in that particular drawer when someone wanted them difficult to find. A ranch hand knew that. She walked back to the office and sat down. She turned to a clean page in her notebook. She wrote 2 words at the top and underlined them and looked at them for a moment. Then she opened it to the next page and kept going. She found him at the creek on Friday evening, at the hour she had noticed him there twice before. He was sitting on the bank with his boots off and his hat on the ground beside him, looking at the water with the ease of a man who did not require the world to entertain him. She sat down beside him without asking. For a while, neither of them spoke. The creek was running low in the summer heat, but it moved steadily over the flat stones of the bed, and there was something about that consistency that she found steadying. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "All right," he said. She did not look at him. She looked at the water. "I have found evidence of systematic financial fraud at this ranch," she said. Her voice was level. "Fraudulent supply invoices, payroll records that don't match actual wages earned, internal land transfer documentation that doesn't correspond to county records. She paused. The person responsible is Edmund Voss. Reed did not move. He did not look surprised. What she noticed was a shift in him, a different quality from his usual steadiness, the quality of a person receiving confirmation of something they had been waiting a long time to have confirmed. How certain are you? He asked. I checked everything 3 times, she said. I cross-referenced every document I could access against independent records. The pattern is too consistent and too specific to be error or coincidence. She looked at him then. He was looking at the water. Someone has been taking money from this ranch for years, she said. It is not a small amount. Reed was quiet for a long moment. The creek moved. Somewhere in the cottonwoods a bird called once and went silent. The land transfers, he said. The internal documentation. Did you determine where those parcels went? Who is listed as the buyer? A company called Meridian Land and Cattle, she said. I can't find it in Montana County records. But 2 of the 3 transfers appear to have gone through at the county level in Wyoming. The 3rd is documented internally but doesn't appear in the official registry at all. She watched his face when she said the 3rd part. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. Both, he said quietly. Some of each. She turned and looked at him directly. You know more about this than you've said. He turned then and met her eyes. What she saw there was not evasion. It was the weight of a person who had been carrying a truth for a long time and was choosing carefully how much of it to set down. Yes, he said. Why haven't you done anything about it? Because knowing something and proving it are 2 different things. He looked back at the water. And because I had reasons to approach this carefully. He paused. I still do. What reasons? He was quiet for a moment. Not tonight, he said. Tell me what you still need. Tell me what proof is still missing. She wanted to push. She had always been the kind of woman who pushed. But there was something in the way he said it. Not evasion, not deflection, but the deliberate honesty of a person choosing the right moment that made her hold herself back. She told him what she still needed. The signed vendor contracts, the originals. She had found the invoices and the corresponding ledger entries. But the underlying contracts, if they existed, would have the signatures that connected everything. She needed the handwriting. She needed the names. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he nodded slowly. Edmund keeps a locked tin box, he said. Back of the lower shelf in his quarters behind the wool blankets. He rides out every Monday morning to the Delaney property 3 miles west. He's been doing it for 8 months. He's gone a minimum of 2 hours. She looked at him. That is very specific knowledge for a ranch hand, she said. He looked back at her, steady and quiet. It is, he said. He didn't explain it. She sat with that. If I find what I think I'll find, she said slowly, where do we take it? Edmund has relationships with the county clerk. I've seen the correspondence in the files. He has been here 4 years. He has had 4 years to build protection for himself. She stopped. She had not intended to say how much she had found in the correspondence files. He didn't react to it. There is somewhere to take it, he said quietly. Trust me on that. There is somewhere to take this that he hasn't reached. You know that for certain, she said. Yes, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. The evening had come down fully around them. The creek moved in its steady way over the stones. All right, she said. Then I'll find the contracts. She started to rise. He spoke again quietly. Norah. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her name. Be careful with Edmund, he said. Not because he's intelligent. He isn't, particularly. But he's the kind of man who acts badly when he feels cornered. And he has been watching you since your 2nd day. She turned and looked at him. Since the 2nd day, she said. He came to me that evening, Reed said. Asked whether I'd noticed anything about the new accountant that seemed unusual. She felt something cold move through her. He came to you. Yes. Why would he come to you? Reed picked up his hat from the ground. He turned it in his hands once, slowly. Because he thought I might tell him something useful, he said simply. He set the hat back on. I didn't. She studied him in the near dark, the shape of his face, the steadiness of him. Why did he think you would? She asked. He stood, and in the movement there was something that caught at the edge of her understanding. Not the ease of a hired man at the end of a working day. Something settled. Something that belonged here in a way that went deeper than employment. That, he said quietly, is a conversation for after you find the contracts. He looked at her one more time. Then he walked back toward the ranch buildings, and Norah Caulfield stood at the edge of the creek with the night coming down around her and the full weight of what she was carrying pressing against her ribs. She thought about Daniel, about the farm, about the lawyer in Billings who had explained things slowly. She thought about the banker standing 3 rows back with his head bowed at a funeral he had helped cause. She thought about all the times the right thing had cost her everything, and nothing had changed because of it. And she thought about a man who knew which drawer to send her to, who knew which mornings Edmund Voss rode out, and how long he stayed gone, who sat at the creek with his boots off and said, "This place matters to me," in the tone of voice you used when you meant something considerably different from what the words appeared to say. She turned and walked back toward the main house. The evening was warm and dark, and she did not feel like a woman who was alone. She felt for the first time in a long time like a woman who had found exactly the right fight. She went back to the office. She sat down at the desk. She opened the notebook to a clean page. She kept going. She found the contracts on a Monday morning. Edmund rode out at 7, the way Reed said he would, the sound of his horse fading south across the flat ground toward the Delaney property. Norah waited 20 minutes after the last sound of hooves had gone completely before she moved. She walked from the office to the main house at her normal pace, the pace of a woman going about her ordinary morning, because she had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing a person in a difficult position could do was look like they were afraid. She was not afraid. She told herself that. The tight feeling beneath her ribs was focus. That was all it was. Edmund's quarters were at the back of the main house, off the kitchen corridor. The door was unlocked. That did not entirely surprise her. Men like Edmund rarely locked interior doors. They relied on the assumption that nobody would dare. She found the tin box in under 4 minutes. Lower shelf back of the cabinet behind a folded stack of wool blankets that had not been moved recently based on the dust along the top edge. The lock was a simple lever mechanism, the kind that opened with a common ranch key. Reed had left a ring of keys on the corner of her desk that morning, set down without comment sometime before she arrived at 6, the way he communicated things he could not say directly. The third key she tried fit. Inside were 11 contracts. She did not take them. That was the decision she had made the night before, sitting at her desk with the lamplight low and her notebook open to a clean page. She did not take them because Edmund would notice they were gone, and she needed him not to know she had been here. She had brought paper and a pen in her coat pocket, and she sat down on the floor of Edmund Voss's quarters on a Monday morning in August and copied every relevant detail from every contract by hand. Dates, vendor names, amounts, signature lines, the signatures. She was back in her office with the box relocked and the keys returned to the corner of her desk before the sound of Edmund's horse came back up the drive. She sat at her desk while her hands shook very slightly for approximately 30 seconds. Then she opened her notebook and began checking her copied details against what she already had. Every fraudulent invoice she had flagged in the ledger books had a corresponding contract in that box. Every single one, without exception. The amounts matched. The vendor names matched. The dates aligned with the invoice entries in a way that confirmed the invoices had been generated from the contracts, not the other way around. And every contract bore the same signature, not Edmund's name. A name she had seen once before, briefly, in the payroll records from the spring of 1880. A ranch hand who had been employed at Hargrove Ranch for approximately 8 months before being let go. His termination record, written in Edmund's hand, cited that theft of ranch property. The name on the line was Court Deain. Someone had been signing Court Deain's name to fraudulent vendor contracts for 4 years. She put her pen down and sat with that for a long moment. Court Deain had been accused of theft and dismissed in the spring of 1880 by Edmund. 8 months after Edmund arrived. According to the payroll records, the man had simply been gone after that. No forwarding address, no further correspondence, no record of any kind beyond the termination notice. A name that had been removed from the ranch's present and kept available for use on paper. Whoever had built this system had been careful enough to put distance between Edmund Voss and the contracts. If the fraud was ever discovered, the signature pointed to a man who was gone and could not be located to contradict what the papers said about him. She heard footsteps in the corridor and picked up a routine ledger page and was writing figures when Edmund appeared in the doorway. "Productive morning?" he asked. "Very," she said. She did not look up. "The vendor reconciliation for the second quarter is almost complete." "Excellent." He paused in the doorway. She could feel him holding himself there, the particular weight of a man taking up space deliberately. "Any irregularities worth flagging?" She turned a page. "Nothing I can't resolve," she said. A pause. "Good." He said it like he was confirming something he had already decided. "That's good to hear." He left. She waited until his footsteps had faded completely through the kitchen and out to the yard before she exhaled slowly and set the pen down. She found Reed at the equipment shed that afternoon. He was sharpening a blade, long even strokes against the stone, and he stopped when she came in and closed the door behind her. She handed him 2 pages of her copied notes without preamble. He read them standing up. He took his time. When he was done, he looked at the pages for another moment before he spoke. 11 contracts, he said, all corresponding to invoices you've already flagged, all signed with a name that doesn't match any current employee. Court Deain, he said. It was not a question. She looked at him sharply. "You know that name. He worked here until the spring of 1880, Reed said. He set the pages down on the work table. Good hand. Careful worker. He started raising questions about the supply ordering shortly after Edmund took over management. Said the quantities being ordered were significantly higher than what the ranch actually needed. He kept track of his own figures and brought them to Edmund directly." He paused. "Edmund told the owner that Deain had been stealing from the supply inventory, had him dismissed." She heard the word owner without reacting visibly. She was not ready to pull on that thread yet. "Was he stealing?" she asked. "No," Reed said. He said it the way he said everything, simply and without qualification. He was not. "Does Deain know his name is on those contracts?" "I don't believe so." Reed set the blade down. "I think Edmund chose his name specifically because the man was gone and couldn't be located to contradict what the paper said about him." He looked at the copied notes again. Deain pushed back on the supply ordering. Edmund removed him and then used his name to authorize the inflated supply contracts for the next 4 years. Norah took the pages back and folded them carefully. I need one more piece, she said. The land transfers. I have the internal documentation and the county confirmation on 2 of the 3 parcels, but I need to verify the buyer, the Meridian Land and Cattle Company. I can't find it in Montana records. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then try Wyoming, he said. The Territory Business Registry. Look for the company under a man named Arthur Voss. She looked at him. Arthur Voss, she repeated. Edmund's older brother, Reed said. He held her eyes. I've suspected the connection for over a year. I have not been able to confirm it. Can you? My lawyer in Billings has a contact in Cheyenne, Reed said. If I send word today, we could have confirmation within the week. She was thinking about the timeline, about Edmund at her doorway that morning, about the particular way he had said good and stood there in the corridor a moment longer than necessary. We may not have a week, she said. Reed looked at her. How closely is he watching you? He came by the office 3 times yesterday, she said. He has never done that before. And one of the other hands, a young man named Pete, mentioned to me at breakfast that Edmund asked him last week whether I had been speaking to any of the workers after hours. Reed set down the sharpening stone. His expression did not change exactly, but something in it tightened in the way of a man revising his timeline. When did Pete tell you this? This morning, at breakfast. I don't think Pete understood the reason Edmund was asking. He mentioned it the way you mentions ordinary conversation. Pete isn't the problem, Reed said. What Pete tells Edmund is. He thought for a moment. Don't change anything. Don't adjust your patterns. If you change how you're moving around this ranch right now, Edmund will know you've found something significant. I know that, she said, a little sharply. He looked at her with something at the edge of a careful smile. I know you know, he said. I'm saying it because I am worried about you. She registered that, not the evasive word he might have used. The direct one. About the investigation, she said. He met her eyes. About you, he said. And then before she could respond to that, he said, I'll send word to Billings today. My lawyer will contact the Wyoming registry through his man in Cheyenne. It won't draw attention if handled through proper channels. He paused. How long before you have everything else in order? 2 days, she said. 3 at most. He nodded. Then we'll have what we need before Edmund makes his move. She started for the door. He spoke behind her. Norah, the signature on those contracts. Court Deain's name. Can you determine whose actual handwriting it is? She turned. I've been comparing it to every signed document in the office that I can attribute with confidence. I haven't found a match yet, but I'm still looking. Look at the wagon maintenance logs, he said. The handwritten ones from the past 2 years. Second cabinet, middle shelf. He paused. Edmund doesn't fill those out himself. He has one of the office workers do them. She understood immediately. He had someone write the forged signatures. I believe so, Reed said. Someone who does what Edmund tells him without asking too many questions. Someone who has been here long enough to be trusted with small administrative tasks, and who doesn't fully understand what he's been asked to do. Who, she said. A man named Douglas Pryor, Reed said. He's been with Edmund since before he stopped. Started again with the particular care of a person selecting words precisely. Since Edmund took over management, he does clerical work, keeps to himself, doesn't mix with the other hands. Norah thought of the man. Quiet, bespectacled, somewhere in his mid-40s, always at a corner desk in the back of the main house, working through paperwork with a focused downward attention, the posture of someone who had trained himself to be unnoticed. She had noticed him. She noticed everyone. But she had filed him away as peripheral and moved on. Thank you, she said. She was back at her desk within the hour with the wagon maintenance logs spread open beside the copied contract signatures. The handwriting matched in 12 distinct letter forms. She counted them twice. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she opened her notebook to a clean page and began writing a very careful, very organized account of everything she had found, everything she could prove, and everything that still needed confirmation. The threat came on Wednesday. She was crossing the yard between the office and the equipment shed, moving at her normal pace, carrying a ledger under her arm the way she always did when Edmund fell into step beside her. He did not call out or hurry to catch up. He simply appeared, smooth and unhurried, like a man to whom the concept of rushing had never been made relevant. How is the reconciliation coming along? He asked pleasantly. Almost finished, she said. She kept walking. I've been giving some thought to the filing system, Edmund said, once you've completed the current project. I have some ideas about efficiency that I think would simplify things considerably going forward. I'm happy to discuss that when the current work is done, she said. Of course. He walked beside her for another few paces. I also wanted to mention, and I say this purely out of consideration for you, that some of the men have noticed you asking questions about operations. Supply deliveries, that sort of thing. He paused. I worry it might create some confusion. Ranch hands aren't always the most reliable sources when it comes to understanding how a business actually runs. She stopped walking. He stopped too, and turned to face her. The smile was there, wide and comfortable. The smile of a man who had already decided how this conversation would end. I ask questions, she said carefully, because sound accounting requires understanding the actual operations, not just the figures. Every serious accountant does that, of course, Edmund said. Of course. I only mean that for questions about how the ranch operates. I should be your primary resource. I have the complete picture. Individual workers see only their own small piece of things. You've mentioned that before, she said. I have, he agreed pleasantly. I mention it again, because it's worth repeating. The implication sat between them, clear as a hand placed on a shoulder. She could feel the full weight of it. I understand, she said. She turned and kept walking. She did not change her pace. She did not look back. But when she reached the office and closed the door, she stood with her back against it for a moment and made herself breathe evenly and think clearly. He knew she was close. He didn't know exactly what she had found, but he knew she had found something, and the warning had been entirely plain. Stop now, or face the consequences of not stopping. She thought about Court Deain, who had noticed the supply quantities were wrong and been called a thief for it. She thought about the previous accountant, who had left documents in a drawer because he could not bring himself to destroy them and had apparently left everything else behind as well. She thought about all the careful, patient architecture of what Edmund had built, designed from the beginning to survive investigation, designed by a man who had always expected that someday someone would look too closely. She picked up her pen. She kept going. That evening, Reed came to the creek at his usual time, and she was already there when he arrived. He sat beside her without commenting on the fact that she had come earlier than usual. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I matched the handwriting, she said without preamble. Douglas Pryor wrote the signatures on those contracts. Reed absorbed this without visible reaction. Does Pryor understand what he was signing? I don't know. He may have been told they were routine vendor agreements. He doesn't seem like a man who asks many questions. She paused. Edmund spoke to me today. Reed went very still. She told him what had been said precisely and in order. She had a reliable memory for conversation and had cultivated it deliberately over the years. Because conversation was where the real information lived, the things that never made it onto any ledger page. When she finished, Reed was quiet for a moment. He's trying to decide, he said slowly, whether you're a problem he can manage or a problem he needs to remove. She sat with that word, remove. That's a strong way to put it, she said. It's the accurate way. He turned and looked at her directly, and what was in his face was not alarm but the particular seriousness of a man who had been thinking about something for a long time and had arrived at a conclusion he did not enjoy. I need you to understand what kind of man Edmund Voss is. He didn't build what he's built by leaving things unresolved. The previous accountant, she said. Left in the middle of the night, Reed said. 8 months ago. His family received a letter 2 weeks later saying he had found work in Oregon. He paused. His wife told me privately that she did not believe it was his handwriting. The air in the evening felt different after that. Still warm, still carrying the smell of dry grass and creek water, but different. She looked at the water moving over the stones. And you still couldn't prove anything, she said. I couldn't prove anything, he said. I didn't have what you have. She looked at him. In the low light, she could see the lines of his face clearly, the expression he was wearing. It was not quite calm and not quite fear. It was the weight of a person who had been carrying something for too long and was close enough to the end of it to feel how heavy it had actually been. What aren't you telling me, she said. He looked at the water for a moment before he spoke. You asked me what position I held, he said. That first morning, you said ranch hand, she said. I said the kind that doesn't know when to stop working. He met her eyes. I wasn't lying, but I wasn't complete. She waited. He set the hat down on his knee. My full name is Reed Hargrove, he said. My father built this ranch in 1861. He left it to me in 1876. The quiet that followed was total. She heard the creek. She heard a night bird somewhere in the cottonwoods. She heard her own breath, even and deliberate. You own this ranch, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about 3 weeks of conversations, about the documents in the third drawer. About the way he had said this place matters to me on the first evening, and how she had heard it as something personal without understanding how entirely literal it had been. She thought about Edmund Voss reporting weekly to a man he believed was a hired hand fixing fences. How long? She said finally. Since Edmund started managing, Reed said. 8 months in, I realized something was wrong. The numbers in the quarterly reports didn't match what I could see on the ground. The herd counts were off. The supply deliveries weren't reflecting what we were actually receiving. I started stepping back from the management role, started working alongside the men, listening. He exhaled slowly. When you own something, people show you what they want you to see. When you're just a man with a hammer, people show you what's actually there. And Edmund, she said, he doesn't know who you are. He's met the owner of Hargrove Ranch, Reed said. Twice, in Billings for business meetings. A man named Reed Hargrove who wore city clothes and spoke formally and reviewed the quarterly reports that Edmund had prepared. He has never connected that man to the hand who fixes his fence lines. She looked at the water. She was thinking about the architecture of it. 3 years of living on his own land as a hired man. 3 years of watching and waiting and not being able to prove anything. That is either the most patient thing I have ever heard of, she said slowly, or the loneliest. He did not answer right away. Both, he said finally. It has been both. She stood up. She needed to move. She walked a few paces along the bank and turned to face him. Why are you telling me now? She said. Why not from the beginning? 'Cause from the beginning I didn't know you, he said. He was looking at her steadily, the same watchful, honest attention she had come to recognize as the most consistent thing about him. I needed to know if you were here for the wages or for the truth. I needed to know if you would keep going when it became difficult. He paused. And I needed to know something else, he said quietly. I needed to know if what I saw in you from the first day was real, or whether I was only seeing it because I had been out here alone too long and wanted it to be there. She stood in the last light and looked at this man. This patient, quietly extraordinary man who had watched her carry the weight of his own problem for 3 weeks without telling her it was his. And she felt something complicated move through her. Not anger exactly, though there was anger in it. Something more layered than that. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said simply. He did not argue it. I should have. I have been putting myself at risk, she said, for a ranch I believed was owned by someone who wasn't even present. You were putting yourself at risk for the truth, he said, and for 14 men whose wages were being stolen. That is why you kept going, Norah. Not because of who owned the land. She stopped. He was right. She was aware that she disliked how right he was, and she allowed herself to feel that for a moment without trying to resolve it. I'm still angry, she said. I know, he said. You're allowed to be. She turned back to the water. Does this change what we do next? She asked. No, he said, except that now you know there is somewhere to take this that Edmund hasn't reached, because the person he answers to is me. She turned that over slowly. He reports to you, she said, which means when the time comes you can call a formal meeting. Summon whoever needs to be there without Edmund having any warning. Yes, he'll think it's routine. He's due to present his quarterly management report in 9 days. I've already sent word to my lawyer in Billings. She looked at him. You were already planning this. I was hoping, he said. There is a difference. I was hoping someone would come along who could build the case I couldn't build myself. He held her gaze. I didn't expect. He stopped. Didn't expect what? She said. The creek ran quiet between them. A long moment passed. To find myself awake at 2 in the morning, he said, worried about someone else's safety. She looked at him in the near dark, the shape of him, the steadiness. We have 9 days, she said. We have 9 days, he agreed. Tell me what you still need. The county registry confirmation on the Wyoming connection, she said. That is the last piece. Once I have that, the full case is documented. You'll have it, he said. My lawyer is already working on it. She nodded. She started back toward the ranch buildings. She had gone a few steps when the particular quality of silence behind her made her stop. Not a footstep, just the sense of words being chosen. Norah, she stopped. The handwriting confirmation on Douglas Pryor, he said. You have 12 matching letter forms. Is that sufficient to establish that he wrote those signatures? A competent attorney could argue it's sufficient, she said. A stronger case would have Pryor's own testimony about what he was asked to sign and what he was told those documents were. He was quiet for a moment. Give him until tomorrow evening, Reed said. I think he's close to saying something on his own. He has been avoiding Edmund's eye for 3 days. She considered that. All right, she said. Tomorrow evening, she went back to her office. She sat down at the desk. She opened the notebook to the next clean page, and at the top she wrote 9 days. Then she put her pen to paper and kept going. Douglas Pryor knocked on her office door the following evening at 8:30. She had not sought him out. She had spent the day doing visible, ordinary work, the kind of reconciliation that looked like exactly what Edmund thought she was doing, numbers that implicated no one, progress that could be reported without concern. She had sent a message through Pete that the vendor work would be complete by Friday, no issues, and had watched Pete carry that message across the yard and into the main house. Let Edmund hear it. Let him hear it twice. Let him believe he had managed her. When the knock came, she recognized it as different from Reed's knock, and different from the knock she had come to associate with Raymond Fitch, who brought occasional messages from the bunkhouse. This knock was hesitant, the knock of a man who had been building towards something for several days and had finally run out of time to keep building. Come in, she said. Douglas Pryor opened the door and stood in the frame for a moment before stepping inside. He was a quiet, closed-off man in his mid-40s with spectacles and the posture of someone who had spent years trying to take up as little space as possible. He closed the door behind him without being asked, and that single action told her everything she needed to know about what kind of conversation this was going to be. Miss Caulfield, he said. Mr. Pryor. She kept her voice entirely neutral. She set her pen down and gave him her full attention without leaning forward, without inviting anything, without giving him anything to read in her expression. She let the silence work. He swallowed. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to understand that I didn't know. When I signed those papers, I was told they were standard vendor renewal agreements. Routine paperwork. Edmund said the regular signatory was unavailable and the documents needed to be filed before the end of the month. He told me to sign with the name that was printed above the signature line. His voice was tight and controlled. A man holding himself together with the specific effort of someone who had been holding himself together for a long time and was reaching the limit of what he could manage. He told me it was standard practice, Pryor continued. That it happened occasionally when a key employee was traveling or indisposed. He paused. I should have asked more questions. I've known that for 2 years. Norah did not confirm or deny that she knew what he was referring to. She waited. I looked at some of the invoices, he said. Last year. The ones connected to the vendors whose contracts I had signed. He stopped. His hands were not quite steady. Some of those vendors don't exist. I looked them up in the county business directories. I couldn't find them anywhere. The room was quiet. I am not a brave man, Miss Caulfield, he said. He looked at her directly for the first time since he had come in. But I am not willing to go down alongside him. If what Edmund has built is about to come apart, I need to be on the right side of it before it does. He swallowed again. I need you to know I was not a willing part of this. She looked at him for a long moment. The spectacles, the careful, controlled posture, the hands that were not quite steady. Mr. Pryor, she said, I need to ask you one question directly, and I need an honest answer. All right, he said. Did Edmund send you here tonight? A pause. Not long, but real enough to matter. No, he said. He told me last week to stay away from you entirely. That is part of why I'm here. He exhaled. A man who tells you specifically to avoid someone is a man who is afraid of what that person might hear from you. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she picked up her pen. Tell me exactly what Edmund told you to sign, she said. Every instance, every detail you remember. He told her all of it. 11 contracts across 3 years. Each time the same explanation. Routine paperwork. Unavailable signatory. Sign the name on the line and don't ask questions. He had never been given copies. He had never been told what the contracts were for. He had never been present for any conversation between Edmund and the vendors whose names appeared on those documents. She wrote everything down in her notebook in her clear, precise hand. When he was finished, she set the pen down and looked at him. I am going to need a written statement, she said. Everything you have just told me, written out and signed with your own name. His face went pale around the edges. What happens to me, he asked. His voice was quiet. If your account is accurate and you cooperate fully, she said, you are a witness, not a defendant. She paused. I cannot promise that if you go back to Edmund tonight and tell him what you've told me. He understood the shape of that immediately. The particular pragmatic intelligence of a man who had spent years reading rooms and making calculations about his own position. He'll know I've spoken to you, Pryor said. Perhaps, she said. Or perhaps you came in here on work business, a supply receipt that needed clarification. Nothing unusual. You were here perhaps 40 minutes on a clerical matter, and then you left. Douglas Pryor was not a brave man, but he was not a foolish one. He looked at her for a moment, and then he nodded once, the nod of a man who has made a decision and has stopped second-guessing it. I'll write the statement tonight, he said. He did. 4 pages slid under her office door at 9 o'clock, written in careful small handwriting, signed with his full name at the bottom of the last page. She read it once, verified that it matched what he had told her verbally without meaningful omission, locked it inside the document case she had brought from Billings, and sat quietly for a while. Things were moving faster than she had planned. She went to find Reed. He was at the creek, which meant he had been watching for her because it was later than she usually came, and he was there regardless. She sat beside him and told him about Douglas Pryor without preamble. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment in the particular way he was quiet when he was working through something with real complexity. Pryor's statement changes our timeline, he said. I know. If Edmund finds out Pryor came to you, he won't wait 9 days. He'll move before the quarterly meeting. She had been thinking the same thing since the moment Pryor closed the door behind him. The thought had been sitting cold and specific in her chest for the past hour. Then we move the meeting, she said. Reed looked at her. 3 days, she said. Can your lawyer be here in 3 days? 2, Reed said quietly. I can have him here in 2. She stared at him. You already sent for him. I sent for him the day Douglas Pryor started flinching every time Edmund walked into a room, Reed said, 3 days ago. A man who is usually invisible becomes very readable when he is frightened. He paused. My lawyer should arrive Saturday evening. She absorbed that. What about the Wyoming confirmation? The Meridian land and cattle connection? My lawyer is carrying that information with him, Reed said. His contact in Cheyenne confirmed the registry entry 4 days ago. Arthur Voss is listed as the sole principal of Meridian Land and Cattle, registered in Wyoming Territory in November of 1879. She heard the date land and understood what it meant immediately, 1 year before Edmund was hired as manager of Hargrove Ranch. They planned this before Edmund ever set foot here, she said. Arthur Voss incorporated the company, Reed said. Edmund came to me in Billings 3 months later with excellent references and a quarterly projection that looked right on paper. He was very good at making things look right on paper. Until you looked at the paper, she said. Until you looked at the paper, he said. And the particular way he said it, quietly and without drama, made it into something more than an acknowledgement. Something that sat between them in the dark with its own weight. There is something else, Reed said. Edmund came to me yesterday morning. He asked me whether I had noticed the new accountant spending time in areas of the property that weren't directly connected to her work. She heard her own heartbeat in the moment before she responded. He was specific? He mentioned the equipment shed, Reed said. He mentioned the creek. She was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? That I hadn't noticed anything unusual. He looked at her. That you seemed like a careful woman who liked to understand the full operation before she put numbers to it. Did he believe you? I don't know, Reed said honestly. He thanked me. And then he asked me whether I thought a woman like you, his exact words, was the kind of person who caused trouble or the kind who could be reasoned with. She felt a cold clarity move through her. What did you say? She asked. I said I thought you were the kind of person who did what was right, Reed said, and that in my experience that was neither of the things he described. She looked at him. He didn't like that answer. No, he said. He didn't. She left the creek and walked back across the yard to the main house and went directly to her office and closed the door. She stood inside it for 30 seconds, thinking clearly and fast. Edmund was circling. He had asked his questions and received answers he couldn't quite read and was now making a decision. She could feel it, the particular pressure of a man running out of patience with a situation he had expected to control. She had 2 days. She sat down at her desk. She spent the next 2 hours doing entirely routine, visible, unremarkable work. She reconciled 3 weeks of supply receipts against the delivery logs. She balanced a quarterly payroll summary that was entirely clean and ordinary and implicated no one. She made her handwriting legible and her figures neat and left the work open on the desk in a way that would be immediately readable to anyone who walked in. Let him come. Let him see exactly what he expected to see. She was composing the final section of her complete evidentiary summary in her head as she worked, running through it in sequence the way she had learned to hold large amounts of information, in order, categorized, cross-referenced. By the time the lamp burned low and she finally closed the ledger and stood up from the desk, she had the entire case so thoroughly organized in her memory that if Edmund took every piece of paper she owned, she could reconstruct it from nothing. She stood in the middle of the office for a moment. 2 days. She picked up the document case. She checked the lock. She set it back down on the corner of the desk where it always sat and looked at it for a moment and made a decision she had been turning over since the previous evening. She went to the supply room off the kitchen corridor and found the things she needed. A length of oilcloth, a small folding spade she had seen hanging on the wall there 3 weeks ago and had noted without knowing yet why she was noting it. She went out into the night. The creek was empty at this hour. She moved to the largest cottonwood on the bank, the one she had been sitting beneath on every evening she came here, and she knelt in the dirt at its base and dug. 18 inches down. She measured it with the handle of the spade against her forearm. Then she wrapped the second complete copy of her evidentiary summary in the oilcloth, folded it tight, set it in the hole, and covered it. She smoothed the surface. She stacked 3 flat stones in a line at the base of the tree, the kind of marker that looked like it had always been there. She stood and dusted off her hands. When she turned, Reed was sitting on the equipment shed steps. He had seen her go out. He had seen her come back. He said nothing. He simply looked at her across the dark yard with the same watchful attention he had given her from the first morning, the attention of a man who had learned to observe without requiring explanation. She crossed the yard and stopped in front of him. He made his move tonight, she said. Not directly, but he's decided. Reed looked at her without speaking. I need your lawyer here by 7 tomorrow morning, she said. Not Saturday evening, tomorrow. He'll be here, Reed said. She nodded. She started to walk past him toward the main house. He stood, and she stopped, and they were standing very close together in the dark with the weight of everything pressing against the moment, the morning that was coming, the room that would need to be ready, the man who would walk into it thinking he was still in control. Are you all right? Reed asked. She thought about it honestly. Ask me again tomorrow afternoon, she said. He almost smiled. I will, he said. She went inside. She sat down at the desk and opened the notebook and read through the complete summary one final time, every page, every figure, every cross-reference and documented discrepancy. And by the time the sky outside the window began to lighten toward gray, she had it so completely in her memory that it lived there independent of any paper. She closed the notebook. She stood up. She straightened her collar and looked at the closed office door. On the other side of that door was a man who had spent 4 years building something in a morning that was going to take it apart. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the banker standing 3 rows back with his head bowed. She thought about Court Deain in Wyoming, carrying a name on paper that someone had borrowed without asking. She opened the door and walked out into the early light. Reed's lawyer arrived at 6:53 in the morning. Norah heard the wagon before she saw it, the particular sound of a horse moving at pace on the dry road from Billings, and she was already at the window of her office when it pulled into the yard. The man who climbed down was compact and deliberate in his movements, somewhere in his late 50s, with a leather document case held against his side with the careful attention of a man transporting something irreplaceable. He had the quality of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where powerful people lied and had stopped being surprised by any of it a long time ago. Marcus Aldrin. She had not met him before, but she recognized the type immediately. A man who had learned that patience was more effective than urgency, and that the clearest thinking happened when everything else in the room was noise. Reed met him in the yard. They shook hands briefly, the handshake of men who knew each other well enough to dispense with ceremony. Reed said something. Aldrin nodded, looked toward the main house, nodded again. Then Reed looked up toward her window. She moved away from it and went to her desk and picked up the document case. They met in the equipment shed, the three of them, because it was the one place on the ranch where Edmund Voss never appeared before 9 in the morning. Reed stood near the door. Aldrin sat on a workbench and opened his case with the efficiency of a man who was already running the clock in his head. Norah set everything she had in front of him: the complete written summary, Douglas Pryor's 4-page statement, the county recorder's confirmation letter, the copies she had made of all 11 contracts with the signature analysis notes, the payroll cross-references, the handwriting comparison between the wagon maintenance logs and the forged contract signatures. Aldrin read without speaking. He turned pages without looking up. He spent 4 minutes on Pryor's statement and 3 on the land transfer section. And then he set everything down and looked at her over the top of his glasses. "You did this in how long?" he said. 26 days, she said. He looked at Reed. "She did this in 26 days. I know," Reed said. Aldrin looked back at the papers. "The Wyoming confirmation is in my case," he said. He opened it and withdrew a single document and placed it beside the internal land transfer copies Norah had made. Arthur Voss incorporated Meridian Land and Cattle in the Wyoming Territory in November of 1879. He tapped the date. Edmund Voss was hired as manager of Hargrove Ranch in February of 1880. 3 months later, they built the structure before Edmund ever walked through the gate, Norah said. Aldrin confirmed it without looking up, which means this is not opportunistic theft. This is a conspiracy with premeditation, and that changes what we can ask for and what we can recover. He looked at Reed. "The 2 parcels that transferred through the county registry, I can move to void both transactions on the grounds of fraud and forgery. It will take time and it will be contested. But the legal basis is solid." "How solid?" Reed asked. "Solid enough that Arthur Voss will settle rather than go to trial," Aldrin said flatly. "Because if he goes to trial, a judge will see this." He gestured at the documentation spread across the workbench. "And Arthur Voss does not want a Montana jury looking at this for 3 days. Reed nodded once. "Edmund is making his move this morning," Norah said. She told Aldrin about the altered ledger pages she expected to see, about the framework Edmund was already constructing, the accountant who made errors, the accountant who panicked and altered documents to cover her mistakes, the accountant who, when confronted, accused her employer to deflect attention from herself. Aldrin listened with the focused attention of a man who had heard this particular type of maneuver before and had stopped finding it creative. "He's going to come to you this morning expecting one of 2 things, Aldrin said when she finished. A frightened woman who backs down or a woman who swings wildly and makes herself look unstable. He straightened his glasses. "We give him neither of those things." "What do we give him?" Norah said. "A room full of people he didn't know would be there," Aldrin said. He looked at Reed. "You said you could have the county sheriff and the circuit court's clerk here by 9. "I sent word Thursday evening," Reed said. "They'll be here." Norah looked at him. Thursday evening. Before any of the final pieces had been confirmed, before Douglas Pryor had knocked on her door. "I'd seen enough by Thursday to know we weren't waiting for the quarterly meeting," Reed said simply. She absorbed that and let it settle. "We need Edmund in that meeting room at 9, Aldrin said. Without warning, without time to prepare. He looked at Norah. "Can you get him there?" "Tell him you've reviewed the pages he brought you," Reed said quietly, "and that you have a response. He'll come. He wants to know whether he frightened you." She picked up the document case. "I'll tell him 8:30, she said. "Give us time to have everyone in place." She crossed the yard to the main house. She walked at her ordinary pace. She knocked on Edmund's door with the knock of a woman who had been awake much of the night, because she had, and she let that show in her face when he opened it. She let him see it because it was true and because it was exactly what he expected to see. "I've reviewed the pages," she said. "I think we need to go through them together. 8:30 in the main meeting room. I'd like to be able to show you where I think the confusion started." Edmund looked at her. The calculation moved behind his eyes, quick and practiced. 8:30, he said. The voice of a man walking toward what he believed was a conclusion already written in his favor. 8:30, she said. She turned and walked away and did not look back. At 8:25, Norah was seated at the long table in the main meeting room with the document case in front of her and Marcus Aldrin to her left. Sheriff Walt Donovan, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with the weathered patience of someone who had spent a career separating what people said from what was actually true, sat at the far end of the table with a deputy beside him. Both had arrived at 8 and been briefed by Aldrin in under 15 minutes. The circuit court's clerk, a young man named Arthur Beale who took notes the way other men breathed, sat beside the sheriff with 2 blank ledger pages and 3 sharpened pencils already laid out in front of him. Douglas Pryor sat in a chair against the wall with his hands folded on his knees. He was very pale. He was there because Aldrin had asked for every witness and because Douglas Pryor had slid 4 pages under a door at 9 o'clock the previous evening and made his choice. Raymond Fitch stood near the back wall with his 7-year composition book under his arm. He had been told only that his records were needed and that he should come to the meeting room at 8. He had asked no questions. He had simply appeared on time with the book. Reed stood near the window. He had changed not dramatically, not beyond his means, but deliberately. A clean shirt, his good boots, the pair Norah had not seen before. He held himself in the particular way he held himself when he was not trying to disappear into the background. Upright and settled, the ease of a man standing on his own ground because he was. At 8:30 exactly, Edmund Voss opened the door. He saw the room and stopped. The pause was not long enough for a casual observer to have registered it. Just a fraction of a second where the information reached him and his body understood what it meant before his mind had fully caught up. Then the professional composure was back in place and he came in and looked at Marcus Aldrin with a controlled pleasantness that cost him something to maintain. "I don't believe we've met," he said. "Marcus Aldrin," Aldrin said, attorney representing the owner of record of Hargrove Ranch. Edmund's eyes moved to the sheriff, back to Aldrin. Something adjusted in his posture, a subtle tightening like a man quietly identifying the available exits. "I wasn't informed there would be a legal proceeding this morning," he said. His voice was still even. She gave him credit for that. "No," Aldrin agreed pleasantly. "You weren't." Edmund's eyes found Norah. She looked back at him without expression and said nothing. Then Edmund looked at Reed, and something happened to his face. It was subtle. The kind of thing you missed if you were not paying close attention. But Norah had been paying close attention for 26 days, and she did not miss it. Recognition first, and beneath the recognition, moving up through the composure like water finding a crack, the beginning of something Edmund Voss had probably not felt in a very long time. "Reed," Edmund said carefully. "Morning, Edmund," Reed said. His voice was entirely ordinary, the same quiet tone he used every day on the ranch, the same ease. He did not change a single thing about how he held himself, and somehow that was the most devastating thing in the room. "I didn't realize you would be." Edmund stopped. "Started again. What exactly is this?" "Please sit down," Aldrin said. "We have a considerable amount to cover this morning." Edmund did not sit immediately. He stood in the middle of the room and Norah watched him run through his options with the speed of a man who had been in difficult situations before and had always found a way through them. She watched him assess each possibility and come up against the same answer every time. The room was full. The exits were covered by the presence of a county sheriff. The woman he had intended to discredit was seated across the table with a document case in front of her and an expression that offered him nothing to read. He sat down. "Mr. Voss," Aldrin said, "my name is Marcus Aldrin and I represent the owner of Hargrove Ranch, Mr. Reed Hargrove." He gestured toward Reed without theatrics, who, as you may have gathered, has been present on this property for the past 3 years in a capacity that did not fully represent his position. Edmund looked at Reed. Reed looked back at him with the same steady attention he gave everything. "You," Edmund said. One word entirely flat. "Me," Reed said. The silence that followed had weight. Edmund recovered faster than Norah had expected. She watched him locate something beneath the shock and pull it up, not composure exactly, but a functional substitute for it. His hands came together on the table in a deliberate way. His voice, when he spoke again, had nearly recovered its evenness. "Whatever you believe you have found," he said, "I want to remind everyone in this room that I have operated this ranch in full accordance with the management agreement I signed with the owner. Every financial decision I made was within the scope of my authorized authority." "Let's discuss those decisions," Aldrin said. He nodded to Norah. She opened the document case. She did not rush. She had 26 days of documented work in front of her, and she had been over every piece of it so many times that it lived in her memory as clearly as it lived on the page. She laid it out the way she had always laid out complex information, methodically, in order, without a single word more than was required. The fraudulent supply invoices, beginning in the spring of 1880, cross-referenced against actual delivery records and verification. The payroll discrepancies documented against Raymond Fitch's independent 7-year log and verified against the worker's own records. The forged signatures on 11 vendor contracts, identified through handwriting comparison with the wagon maintenance logs, and confirmed by Douglas Pryor's written statement describing exactly what he had been told to sign and exactly what he had been told those documents were. The internal land transfer documentation for 3 parcels, compared against the official county registry, the Wyoming Business Registry entry for Meridian Land and Cattle, the name Arthur Voss on the line marked principal owner, the date of incorporation, November 1879, the date of Edmund's hiring, February 1880. She laid each piece down in sequence and explained it, and Arthur Beale's pencil moved without stopping, and Sheriff Donovan's expression shifted gradually from professional neutrality to the particular quiet of a man moving from skepticism to certainty, one documented fact at a time. Edmund interrupted 3 times. The first time he challenged the payroll records. The discrepancies, he said, reflected authorized performance deductions that fell within his management discretion. Norah set the management agreement in front of him and asked him to locate the clause permitting unilateral wage deductions without written notification to the affected worker. He read the relevant section. He set the document down without speaking. The second time he challenged the vendor contracts. The agreements, he said, had been reviewed and approved through proper management channels. Norah set Douglas Pryor's written statement on the table and said nothing further. Edmund looked at Pryor. Pryor looked at his hands. The third time, he looked directly at Norah and said that the figures she was presenting had been altered by her, that the ledger pages he had brought to her office the previous evening showed clearly that she had made significant errors in the reconciliation and had subsequently changed the records to obscure those errors. "The pages you brought to Miss Caulfield's office last evening," Aldrin said. "Where are they now?" "I have them," Edmund said. "May I see them?" A pause. "I don't have them with me at this moment." "Then I'll note for the record," Aldrin said, his voice entirely level, "that the original ledger books, all 8 of them, have been in the custody of Miss Caulfield's locked document case since her 3rd day of employment." He looked at Sheriff Donovan. "Sheriff, you examined the case locks this morning before the meeting." "Intact," the sheriff said. "Seals undisturbed. The pages Mr. Voss brought to Miss Caulfield's office," Aldrin continued, "were copies made from the originals, with figures altered after the copying was done." He paused. "Which we can demonstrate through direct comparison to the originals if you would like to proceed in that direction." Edmund said nothing. The silence this time was longer and had a different quality than the ones before it. Norah looked at the table in front of her. She had imagined this moment, not precisely this room with these people, but the moment itself, the moment when the architecture of a deception met the architecture of documented truth and one of them had to give way. She had thought it might feel large and dramatic the way it felt in the kind of stories people told about justice. It felt very quiet, like a long-held breath finally releasing. "Arthur is my wife's brother," Edmund said. His voice had changed. The smoothness was gone from it. What was underneath was flatter and older and carried something that was not quite genuine remorse, but was the particular exhaustion of a man who had been performing confidence for a very long time and had reached the end of what the performance could sustain. "The land transactions were sound investments. I had broad discretionary authority over ranch financial decisions. You had discretionary authority over operating expenses under $10,000, Aldrin said. The management agreement is explicit on that point. Land transactions required direct written authorization from the owner of record." He set the agreement on the table, open to the relevant page. "Authorization you never sought because the owner didn't know the transactions were occurring." Edmund looked at Reed. "Carter," he began, and then stopped, understanding his mistake even as he made it. "Mr. Hargrove," Aldrin said simply, correcting the form of address the way you corrected any misstatement of fact. Not unkindly, just precisely. Edmund looked at Reed for a long moment. Reed had not moved from his position near the window. He had not spoken since his initial acknowledgement of who he was. He stood with his hands at his sides and watched Edmund Voss sit across a table from 4 years of documented theft with the steadiness of a man who had waited a very long time for this morning and had nothing left to prove by it. "I built this operation," Edmund said, and now there was something in it that sounded almost genuine. Not remorse, not quite, but the real bewilderment of a man who had told himself a particular story about what he had done for so long that he had stopped being able to distinguish the story from the truth. "When I came here, the herd numbers were half what they are now. The supplier relationships, the territory reputation, the operational efficiency. I built that." "You built some of that," Reed said. It was the first time he had spoken since Edmund sat down, and the room shifted slightly when he did, the particular shift of a space when the person who actually has authority in it finally speaks. "I was here. I know what you built." He paused. "You also took $83,000 over 4 years. You shorted 14 men who worked this land honestly, and you sold 63 acres of my father's ranch to your brother-in-law for a price the two of you agreed on before you ever set foot on this property." Another pause. "Don't tell me what you built." Edmund looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the calculation was entirely gone from his face. What was there instead was the expression of a man hearing the full measure of what he had done spoken plainly out loud by someone who had watched all of it and finding the sum of it larger than he had allowed himself to understand. Then the calculation came back, diminished but back. "I want to speak with my own attorney," he said. "That is absolutely your right," Aldrin said. He was already writing. "In the meantime, Sheriff Donovan has some matters to discuss with you." The sheriff stood. Edmund looked around the room one final time. At the sheriff, at Aldrin, at Douglas Pryor, who had not looked up from his hands since Edmund sat down, at Raymond Fitch standing against the back wall with his composition book, and the expression of a man who had been keeping records for 7 years and waiting for the morning they would matter. At Norah, she looked back at him steadily, the same clear attention she had carried into every room for 26 days. Then at Reed, one last look at Reed, and what was in Edmund Voss' face in that final moment, if Norah had been asked to name it precisely, was not anger and was not defiance. It was disbelief, not at being caught. At being caught by this particular person in this particular way, by the man he had spoken to every week for 3 years, reported to in formal quarterly meetings in Billings, handed carefully prepared numbers to, and never once understood. The sheriff moved toward the door. Edmund stood. "Miss Caulfield," he said. He looked at her, and there was no smile. He was past that now. "You have to understand this was never personal." She looked at him. 14 men, she said. "I have all 14 names. I have the amount each one was shorted, to the dollar, for every month across 4 years. She set her notebook on the table. To them it was personal. He left the room between the sheriff and the deputy, and the door closed, and the room was quiet. Douglas Pryor made a sound. Just once, not a word, not anything with shape to it, just the sound of a man setting down something he had been carrying for 2 years. Then he was quiet. Aldrin was writing. Arthur Beale was writing. The scratch of pencils on paper was the only thing in the room for a long moment. Reed moved away from the window. He came to stand beside the table near where Norah sat, and he did not say anything immediately, and neither did she. The table was covered with papers, with everything she had built over 26 days, and she looked at it, and then she looked at the window where the morning light was coming in clean and direct. The northern parcel, she said finally, the one where the internal transfer was forged, but the county records were never changed. Still mine, Reed said. Clean title, never altered. And the two that did transfer? Aldrin will file to void both transactions by end of week, Reed said. He glanced at Aldrin, who nodded without looking up from his writing. Arthur Voss will contest it for approximately 4 minutes when he sees the full documentation. 4 minutes, she said. Generous estimate, Aldrin said, dryly. Despite everything she was carrying, despite the long night and the hours of concentrated attention and the weight of what she had just watched happen in this room, Norah felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been held tight for a very long time. She closed the document case. She sat for a moment. Reed sat down across the table from her. The papers were still spread between them, all of it, the careful record of everything that had been done and everything that had been found. He looked at it, and then he looked at her. I owe you something, he said. You owe me my wages, she said. But you've been paying. More than that. He held her eyes. I put you in the path of a dangerous man. I knew what Edmund was capable of, and I let you carry more of this than was fair because you needed it to come from someone he hadn't already managed, she said. Yes. He paused. And because I couldn't build what you built. I don't have the training for it. I don't have the eye for numbers that you have. He looked at the papers, and because I trusted you before I had a right to, and I'm aware that wasn't entirely reasonable. She looked at him across the table, covered with 26 days of her work. It was reasonable, she said. You had good instincts. I had good instincts about you, he said, and the way he said it made it into something more specific than the words appeared to be. She was not a woman who looked away from things. She did not look away from this. The workers, she said, the 14. I'll speak to each of them today, Reed said, personally, every man. Some of them have been here for years, she said. They're going to have questions about who has actually been running this ranch. They deserve honest answers, Reed said. He set his hat down on the table beside the papers and left it there. I reckon I've had enough of not being honest about things. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood and picked up the document case. There is something else I need to say, Reed said. He said it before she could move toward the door, quietly but without hesitation, the voice of a man who had made a decision to stop measuring his words and intended to keep to it. I told you at the creek that I was worried about you. You did, she said. I was imprecise, he said. Worried is not the right word. It's the word I used because the right word was more than I had standing to use at the time. He looked at her directly and steadily. What I am, Norah, is considerably more invested in your well-being than a ranch owner has any practical reason to be in his accountant. The room was quiet. Aldrin was writing and had the expression of a man who was hearing nothing at all. I know what you are, she said. He was still. I've known for a while, she said. I didn't have the right word either. I was waiting to be certain. Are you certain, he said. She picked up her notebook and her pen. She looked at him across the room. Ask me tonight at the creek, she said, when there isn't a lawyer present. Reed looked at Marcus Aldrin. Aldrin turned a page and continued writing without comment. Reed looked back at Norah, and for the first time since she had known him, in all the weeks of careful words and early mornings and dark evenings at the water's edge, she saw him smile. Not the careful, restrained thing she had caught glimpses of before. A real smile, full and unguarded and entirely human. It changed his face completely, made it younger and open in a way that the careful stillness never quite managed. I'll be there, he said. She walked to the door and stopped. Reed, she said. He looked at her. Court Deain, she said. You owe him a letter, wherever he is in Wyoming. Reed nodded slowly. I'll write it today, he said. She looked at him one more moment, that open, unguarded face, the smile already settling back into his usual steadiness but different now, the steadiness of a man who had set something down and felt the difference of not carrying it. She turned and walked out into the morning. The ranch was alive around her. Raymond Fitch was crossing the yard with his composition book still under his arm, moving with the purposefulness of a man who had just had 7 years of careful record-keeping confirmed as worthwhile. 2 hands she knew by name, a young man called Pete and an older one called Calloway, who had been at Hargrove Ranch longer than almost anyone, were working near the barn, and when she passed, Pete looked up and said, "Good morning, Miss Caulfield," the way he always did. And she said, "Good morning, Pete," the way she always did. And everything was ordinary, and nothing at all was the same. She went to her office. She sat down. She opened the document case and took out one clean page and wrote at the top of it, in her clear, precise hand, Wage Reconciliation, Hargrove Ranch, August 1884. 14 names. She wrote them all from memory because she had put them there deliberately weeks ago and they had not moved. She started at the top of the list. The reconciliation took 11 days. Norah had estimated longer. She had built the timeline assuming resistance, assuming gaps in documentation, assuming the passive friction that happened when an organization had been running one way for years and was being asked to run another. What she had not built in was Raymond Fitch. Reed brought him to the office on the first morning, not hovering, not directing, simply present in the way he had been present from the beginning, steady and unhurried. When Norah laid out the 14 worker files and explained what documentation was missing for each one, Reed listened, and then he asked Fitch whether he could help fill the gaps. Fitch looked at the files. He looked at Norah. "I can tell you what every man on this ranch did every day for the past 7 years, he said. "I've been keeping my own log." Norah looked at him. "Why?" she asked. "Because somebody had to," Fitch said simply. He went and got the log. It was a battered composition book, dense with small even handwriting, every day accounted for, every man named, every task recorded. 7 years of it, beginning before Edmund arrived and continuing through every week since. Norah held it for a long moment before she opened it. "Fitch," she said carefully, "did you know what was happening with the payroll?" He was quiet for a beat. "I knew the numbers weren't right," he said. "I couldn't prove it. I kept figuring that if I kept the record long enough, someone with the right kind of mind would come along and be able to use it." She looked at Reed. Reed looked at Fitch with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and the particular pain of a man understanding how long the people around him had been quietly carrying his problem alongside him. "Thank you," Reed said. Fitch shrugged the way a man did when he had done something that mattered and did not require acknowledgement for it. "Pay the men what they're owed," he said. "That's enough." With Fitch's log, the reconciliation moved faster than Norah had thought possible. By the 3rd day, she had verified figures for 11 of the 14 workers. By the 6th day, all 14. By the 11th day, she had a complete accounting document, signed and witnessed by Marcus Aldrin, who had stayed on at the ranch specifically for that purpose, with a total figure that she handed to Reed on a single clean page. He looked at it for a long moment. He did not flinch at the number. "When can they be paid?" he asked. "I can have the bank drafts prepared by Friday," she said. "Do it Thursday," he said. He did it Thursday. She was in the yard when Reed spoke to the men. He had gathered them after the morning work. All 14 of the workers owed back wages, plus most of the rest of the ranch hands. Because word had moved through the bunkhouse, the way word always moved on a working ranch, where people lived in close quarters and information traveled on its own current. They stood in the yard in the morning light, this collection of weathered, careful men who had spent years on land they respected under a manager they had tolerated and an owner they had never seen. Reed stood in front of them without ceremony. No prepared remarks, no lawyer beside him, no paper in his hand. "Most of you know by now who I am," he said. "And most of you know what was taken from you. I'm here to tell you that I know it too. I know the amount, and I know the years. And I know that knowing doesn't fix what it felt like to see a number on your pay packet that wasn't what you'd earned." The yard was completely quiet. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I didn't know what was happening," he said. "Because the truth is I suspected. I suspected for a long time, and I spent too long trying to build the proof the careful way. And while I was being careful, men who worked this land honestly were being shorted." He stopped. "That's on me. I own that." Nobody spoke for a moment. Calloway, who was the longest-serving hand after Fitch, and who had a face that had spent decades learning not to reveal what it felt, said quietly, "You're paying it back." "All of it," Reed said, "to the dollar." Calloway was quiet for a moment. "Then we're square," he said. It was not forgiveness exactly, not the wiping clean of something that had happened. It was the particular pragmatic grace of men who understood that what mattered was action and not sentiment, and who had enough experience of the world to know that action was considerably rarer than sentiment, and who were prepared to recognize it when they saw it. It was enough. Norah stood at the edge of the gathering and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for weeks. The legal proceedings against Edmund Voss moved through the county court with the speed of a case where the evidence left no meaningful room for argument. Marcus Aldrin filed in Billings. Arthur Voss's attorney contacted Aldrin's office within 48 hours of the Wyoming documents being formally submitted, and the negotiation that followed lasted less than 2 weeks. Arthur Voss agreed to void both land transfers and pay restitution for the period the parcels had been held, plus surveying costs, plus a figure that Aldrin described to Reed as appropriate encouragement not to revisit this kind of arrangement. Reed told Norah the total when it was settled. She raised an eyebrow. He agreed to that willingly, she said. His attorney told him what a Montana jury would do with the full evidence package. Aldrin said from across the office where he was packing his case for the last time. Arthur Voss is not a man who enjoys being in rooms where people are angry at him. Edmund did not settle. He hired an attorney from Billings who made several vigorous arguments about the scope of management authority and the legitimate discretion afforded to senior employees in operational financial decisions. Every one of those arguments met Norah's documentation and stopped there, the way water stopped against good stone. The criminal proceedings took 4 months, but the outcome was not something anyone in the county courthouse seriously doubted once the documentation was placed before the court. When the verdict came, Norah was in Billings for the proceedings. She sat in the back row of the courtroom and watched Edmund Voss hear a number of years read aloud in a formal voice, and watched his face move through several things in quick succession before settling into what she recognized from the morning in the meeting room. The flat, tired thing beneath the confidence, the thing that had always been there when the performance finally ran out. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had been carrying this for months, and she had thought there would be something clean about the end of it, something that closed completely. What she felt instead was tired, a deep and specific tiredness that had nothing dramatic about it. And beneath the tiredness, something quieter and warmer that had been there for a while without her naming it. The feeling of a promise kept. She had made herself a promise over a fresh grave on a windy August morning with no witnesses and no ceremony, and she had kept it every day, through every room and every ledger page and every evening at the creek. That was what she felt. The quiet satisfaction of a woman who had said she would do something and had done it. She took the late wagon back to Hargrove Ranch. Reed was at the creek when she arrived. It was evening by then, the light coming long and golden across the grass the way it did at this hour, and she came through the cottonwoods and he was there, boots off, hat on the ground beside him, looking at the water. He looked up when he heard her, and what was in his face when he saw her was so immediate and unguarded that she had to look at the creek for a moment just to have somewhere to put it. Verdict, he said. Guilty, she said. On all counts. He nodded, not triumphant, just settled. The nod of a man who had waited a long time for something to be resolved and was now simply absorbing the fact that it had been. She sat beside him. They were quiet for a while. The creek ran low and steady over the flat stones, the same way it had run on every evening she had come here, the way it had been running since long before either of them existed and would run long after. She had always found something steadying about that consistency. "I've been thinking," Reed said. "About what?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, choosing the words carefully the way he always did when they mattered. "About the fact that you came to this ranch with $14 in your mother's suitcase. And in the time since then, you rebuilt the accounts of this property, documented 4 years of fraud, helped recover 63 acres of land, gotten 14 men what they were owed, and helped put a man before a criminal court." He paused. "And you've been paid an accountant's wages for all of it." "I've been paid fairly," she said carefully. "You've been paid for accounting," he said, "not for the rest of it." "The rest of it wasn't in the contract," she said. "No," he said, "it wasn't." He turned toward her. "I want to change that." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to stay on," he said. "Not as the accountant, not only as the accountant," he held her eyes. "I want you to be part of this ranch in a real way, a formal way, a percentage of the operation, your name on the deed, not wages, ownership." She had not expected that word, not that specific word spoken that plainly. "I've spoken to Aldrin," Reed continued. "He can structure it as a formal partnership." He paused. "I'm not asking you to decide anything else tonight. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I'm saying this ranch is better with you in it, and I want that recognized in the only way that actually means something in this territory." He stopped. "In a way that has nothing to do with what I feel when I see you come through those trees." She sat with that for a long moment. The creek moved. The evening birds were starting in the cottonwoods. "You're separating the two things," she said. "I'm trying to," he said, "because I don't want you to say yes to one because of the other. Or no to one because of the other. They should both stand on their own." She looked at the water. She thought about what it meant to be offered something she had earned, not given as a favor, not granted out of sentiment, offered because someone had looked at what she had done and said, "This is your value and I intend to recognize it properly." She thought about the $14. She thought about the lawyer who had explained things slowly. She thought about 26 days of carrying the truth in a document case with a false bottom, working by lamplight after supper, walking fence lines in the early morning, sitting in an equipment shed with a forged contract in her hands matching letter forms one by one. She thought about what Daniel would have said. Daniel, who had been gentle and honest, and who would have sat very still and thought carefully, and then said something like, "Norah, you've earned this. Don't you dare say no to what you've earned. I want to see the partnership structure in writing before I agree to anything," she said. Reed was quiet for a moment. "That's entirely reasonable," he said. "I'll have changes," she said. "I'd be worried if you didn't," he said. She looked at him, and the other thing she said, "The thing that isn't the partnership." He looked back at her. "I am not a simple woman," she said. "I need you to understand that clearly before anything else. I have opinions and I keep my own records, and I will tell you plainly when I think you're wrong." "I know that," he said. "You say that now," she said. "Knowing a thing and living alongside it are different." "Norah," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "I spent 3 years living on my own ranch, pretending to be a hired hand so that the people around me would show me what was actually true rather than what they wanted me to see." He held her eyes. "I do not have a problem with a woman who says exactly what she means." She looked at him. She thought about the first morning. The fence post, and the rotted wood, and a man who had said 3 feet before she could tell him. She thought about the coffee appearing on the corner of her desk without explanation. She thought about the ring of keys left there without comment. She thought about all the evenings at the creek and all the things he had said that meant more than they appeared to, and all the things he had not said because the time for them had not yet been right. She thought about what it felt like to stop being alone in a fight. "All right," she said. He was still. "All right to which part?" he asked. She looked at him directly. "Both," she said. The smile came again, the full unguarded one she had seen for the first time the morning after the confrontation, and that she was beginning to understand was the most honest thing about his face. He did not contain it, and she was glad of that. It changed his face completely, made it younger and open in a way that the careful watchfulness never quite managed. He reached over and covered her hand with his, just once, just briefly, the touch of a man who understood that some things did not need to be made large to be real. "I'll have Aldrin draw up the partnership papers Monday," he said. "I'll have my changes back to him by Wednesday," she said. "Of course you will," he said, and the warmth in it made her feel something she had not felt in a very long time, the particular safety of being exactly where she was supposed to be. They sat at the creek a while longer. The evening came down fully, and the stars appeared one at a time, enormous and unhurried, nothing like the sky over Billings where the town light dulled them. The ranch was quiet around them, the horses were settled, the accounts were in order. All of the accounts, every number, honest and documented and verified to 3 independent sources. The land was whole. Every acre of it, including the northern parcel with its empty cabin that had been Reed's father's first structure on this ground, returned cleanly to the registry where it had always belonged. "One thing," Norah said. "Ask it," Reed said. "Court Deain," she said. "Did you write the letter?" "Wrote it the same day you told me to," he said. "Sent it 3 days later when Aldrin confirmed the Wyoming address." He was quiet for a moment. "I told him his name had been used without his knowledge. I told him what we found and what we did about it. And I told him that if he ever wanted to come back to Hargrove Ranch, there was a place for him here." "Did he write back?" "Not yet," Reed said. "But Aldrin says the letter was received." He paused. "I hope he does. He was a good hand. He noticed something was wrong when nobody else was paying attention, and he lost his livelihood for it. That's a debt you can't fully repay, but you can try." Norah thought about the long chain of it. One man who noticed something wrong and got punished for noticing, whose punishment created the distance that allowed 4 years of fraud to continue undisturbed. Until a woman with $14 and a borrowed suitcase arrived and started asking questions that nobody had thought to ask, or that people had been afraid to ask, or that people had asked and paid for asking. The chain had been long. It had cost more people more than it should have. That was the honest truth of it, and she did not look away from it. But the chain had ended. She had helped end it, not by waiting for permission, not by finding the right person to tell her she was allowed. By sitting down at a desk covered in dishonest paper with a pen in her hand and deciding that the wrong number on the page in front of her was her responsibility to correct. "Reed," she said. He said. "The cabin on the northern parcel," she said. "Your father's. I've kept it maintained," Reed said. "But I haven't been out there much." He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't been out there in about 3 years. She looked at the water. "You should go," she said, "when you're ready. Not to do anything with it. Just to go." He turned and looked at her. "Some things," she said quietly, "deserve to be stood in front of and acknowledged, even the things that are hard to stand in front of." He looked at her for a long moment. "Will you come with me?" he said. She looked at the creek, at the water, moving steady and unhurried over the stones, the same as it had always moved, the same as it would keep moving long after this evening was gone. "Yes," she said, "when you're ready." He turned back to the water. He was quiet, but it was the quiet of a man who had put something down, not the quiet of a man still carrying it. The story of what happened at Hargrove Ranch traveled through Montana territory the way stories traveled in that country, carried by wagon drivers and supply men and county officials and hands who moved from ranch to ranch and took their conversations with them. People told it differently depending on who was telling it and what part of it had mattered most to them. Some told it as the story of the owner who had lived among his own men for 3 years and waited for the right moment to take back what was his. Some told it as the story of the woman who had walked into 4 years of careful fraud with a notebook and a pen and had not stopped until every number told the truth. Some told it as a love story, which it was, though not the kind that fit easily into a simple telling. Raymond Fitch told it the way he told everything, plainly and without embellishment when people asked him directly. It was a ranch that needed honest books, he said, and someone came along who knew how to keep them. That's all there is to it. That was most of it. That was the heart of it. The thing underneath all the ledger books and forged contracts and creekside conversations and document cases with false bottoms. A place that needed the truth told and a woman who told it. Not because she had been hired to. Not because the wages were generous or the circumstances were easy or because anyone in any room had told her she was allowed. She told it because she was the kind of woman who could not look at a wrong number and let it stand. And because sometimes that particular stubbornness, the refusal to let a lie remain in the record simply because it was convenient, the insistence on cross-referencing everything 3 times, the willingness to bury your evidence 18 inches down in oilcloth at the base of a cottonwood tree rather than let it be taken from you. Sometimes that grinding, unglamorous commitment to accuracy was exactly what the moment required. Not courage in the dramatic sense, not a single grand gesture in a single important room, just a woman who kept going. Hargrove Ranch stood on the Montana plain for many years after that summer, and the people who worked it were paid what they earned, and the accounts were kept honestly, and every record was documented in a clear hand and cross-reference to independent sources, because that was how the woman who kept the books had always done it, and no one who worked there ever suggested doing it another way. Some things, once you've had them done right, you don't settle for less. Norah Caulfield had known that since the day she stood beside her husband's grave and made herself a promise with no witnesses and no ceremony. She had kept it. Every day, through every room and every number and every evening at the creek, she had kept it. And the quiet man who had been waiting at the fence line on an August morning and had recognized immediately, without question, without doubt, that the woman who told him to dig 3 feet down was exactly who he had been waiting for. That man had kept his own promises, too. To the ranch and to the workers and to the truth and to her. Some people found what they were looking for by searching for it. Some people found it by being exactly who they were, in exactly the right place, and letting that be enough. Norah Caulfield had been a widow with $14 in a borrowed suitcase and a pen. She had been exactly enough.